First podcast in Netflix history to break the daily top tens.
To go from 66 million to north of 400 million in 2 years.
So you had Mayor Mamdani on as well, right? Which no one probably would have expected.
We face a referendum every day on our content.
Netflix's own bosses have said publicly that this is not a format that they felt like they could build themselves. And hello and welcome to this week's edition of The Attention Shift. If you've been enjoying the show, remember to hit like and subscribe wherever you're listening and watching, and hit that notification bell to never miss an episode. I'm delighted to say that this week is the 50th episode of The Attention Shift, but as Tony, who's my guest, reminded me earlier, that's tiny in comparison to some of his shows. I'm sure he'll explain a little bit more about that in a sec. Tony's our first returning guest in The Attention Shift since we've been recording it. And as you know, Tony Pash is the co-founder of Goalhanger. He was on the show back in last December where we talked about his deal with Netflix to take The Rest Is Football to them for the World Cup. 6 months on, the tournament's now done, the numbers are in, and The Rest Is Football became the first podcast in Netflix history to break the daily top tens. If you haven't heard the first conversation, we'll drop that in the show notes, and they are definitely worth revisiting. But Tony, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
Cool, I'm going to dive straight in. So, look, let's talk about the initial success, right? There's been so much that I've seen. Obviously, I've watched it whenever I could. It's been a great accompaniment I've found early in the morning to all of my consumption of the World Cup. And you are the first podcast to break Netflix daily top 10 in any country in the world, I believe, which is a huge achievement. What has Netflix's reaction been to the podcast?
Netflix have really enjoyed having the podcast on the show. I mean, we call it a podcast, but is it really? You know, it's become a show, which is how we like to talk about all of our shows these days. You know, The Rest Is Football started out 3.5 years ago as an audio-only show, and then it became an audio show with video, and then it became an audio show with sophisticated video. And I think the kind of, you know, the holy grail of that is that your content becomes sophisticated and engaging and good enough to look at, that it becomes something that Netflix, the perhaps premium streaming platform of them all, wants to have on their network. So, yeah, we went out every day for 40 days. We shot the show in a studio in New York, looking out over Times Square. And, Netflix seemed to be extremely happy with the result. And the consequence of that is that they've extended the deal, and The Rest Is Football will remain on Netflix for the next 2 years, covering the domestic Premier League season.
Which is amazing, right? And I guess it's all the validation you could ever want. And interestingly, Netflix's own bosses have said publicly that this is not a format that they felt like they could build themselves. And what does that mean for you when ultimately that they say that and then they come to you for this and show that interest in you and what you've built?
I think what it says is that they've acknowledged that it's not easy to build a community of listeners and viewers around content. You know, it's not an easy job. And in many ways for them, I guess, it was a more logical thing to do, to say, right, what is out there? Who's already delivering a really strong audience? Who's already developed a relationship with the audience? And for us, fortunately, they chose The Rest Is Football. And what effectively we did was, we licensed our show, our IP, our intellectual property to Netflix, and along with our audience, and hopefully they got our regular audience and brought some of their own, and maybe some new people who perhaps wouldn't have discovered it on other platforms. And the overall effect is that it's done a good job for Netflix. If you look at the series charts, which obviously, being episodically daily for 40 days, we are a series. We made number one over 20 times during the World Cup, and we're never out of the top 10, and we're mostly number two or number one throughout the tournament. So, yeah, I think it's really done its job for Netflix. It certainly was a brilliant experience for us.
Look, and those are remarkable numbers, right, to hit the number one so often during that run. And I think, look, we've seen that Netflix have dipped their toe in the water with various different live rights around sport, but this is a shift that clearly they wanted to own a narrative around the World Cup without having to go into that live sports rights fight, I guess. What is that shift about? What do they feel like they'd learned by buying into your approach? That that bet that they made that ultimately they could own some kind of narrative around the World Cup?
Yeah, I mean, they were pretty straightforward with us before the tournament and said that a couple of years ago during the Euros, it had been a bit of a battle for the platform in the UK because, for a month, whenever people settled down to watch TV in the evenings, after they've perhaps got home from work or school and had their dinner and are sitting as a family, a lot of the time they were choosing to watch the football, and that is the classic Netflix slot in your day. That is the kind of 7:30 till 10 o'clock slot when you might sit down and watch a drama, a box set drama, or a movie or a documentary, and I think they probably suffered a little because of the football being an alternative all the way through that month in Germany. Yeah. And I think what this offered them was an opportunity to be part of that conversation, to be part of that narrative story for the whole 6 weeks of the World Cup. And it meant that, yes, in the UK, the BBC and ITV will always be your go-to channels for the matches. But if you wanted to take part in the conversation, you had to have something that existed as effectively a kind of shoulder programming offer. And to borrow the rest is football for that 40-day period meant, A, they knew what they were getting in terms of quality product. B, they knew that they were getting top talent, Gary Lineker on your channel, Micah Richards, Alan Shearer, plus a whole host of guests on a daily basis. And C, you know that the show already has an audience, and that audience is likely to migrate and enjoy it on this channel.
Yeah, I think what I found interesting is because, look, right, you recorded it at the end of the day's play effectively, so it was ready to then go out at 6 a.m. UK time and was played out live 6 a.m. UK. Now, I must admit, and I don't know whether that's formal right, and obviously I do know a lot of what's going about because I know you, but even so, I really wanted to watch it when it was going out live, and I tried to be up in time to watch it live. How did you, do you have any insights at the moment how many people were watching it live? And I don't need numbers necessarily, but watching it live versus watching it at various points of the day.
Yeah, the biggest number obviously is in catch-up. 6 till 7 a.m. is never going to be the biggest audience of the day. But it did decent numbers 6 till 7 and then kind of had a tail that would go all day up until the evening. What was really interesting for both us and more to the point Netflix was, Netflix is not a channel that gets the largest part of its share in daytime, and I'm being kind. Daytime is not its strong point. In the evening, Netflix is dominant and really successful. But in the daytime, there's not a massive tradition of people turning to Netflix, in the morning, for example. This show was majority watched in daytime. So it was pioneering. I spoke with the senior executives at Netflix before and during the tournament, and they emphasized this to us, that to have a daily returning show that is scheduled in daytime, that skews male, all of those elements are pioneering, and hopefully it delivered for them on all three. We definitely know that the majority of viewing was before the next set of fixtures start, naturally, and so it served a very useful purpose for them in terms of getting people into the habit of watching the channel, watching the streamer in daytime, not evening.
It's definitely something that plays out from a live perspective as well. Like if you do live streaming on YouTube, you always get, a healthy proportion of your audience who want to watch it live because they want to be in there in the moment, and it might be, like you say, they're chatting with their friends as they're watching it, they're disagreeing, they're agreeing with it, but then there's all of the other people that will come in when it becomes VOD and watch it on catch-up too, so you get your second hit. And it's interesting that it feels like, even though it's been on a different platform to a YouTube, the same thing has essentially played out. And then also, like, we are constantly told that people want to watch content whenever they want to watch it, but people are creatures of habit, and actually some kind of schedule, I think people want that structure.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's interesting. I think it kind of got three windows, which are live at 6, catch up from 7 onwards, and then multiple short form offerings throughout the day. In fact, we ended up we had to get our social content creation team to work overnight. They basically came in very late at night, watched the show being recorded usually at 11 p.m. New York time, which is 4 a.m. UK time. So we record it for an hour, we would review it for an hour, put it out at 6 live. And the social content team were basically working from 11 at night through till 7, 8 in the morning. And And the idea was to basically, create lots of short form clips that would be A, engaging, B, marketing for the main long form content, but also just, content to get out there to audiences on those different platforms. And that was unbelievably successful. Yeah. So our short form during the 40 days of the World Cup was watched 400 million times, which,
wow.
You have to say, well, I can give you a comparison point because 2 years ago during the Euros, which admittedly were a little shorter, there were less games, but still, a month of football, we enjoyed 66 million short form views. So to go from 66 million to north of 400 million in 2 years just goes to show you the expanded appetite for the content on all platforms.
Absolutely. I think part of what played into that as well is you had Niall Horan early on as well. You had Gordon Ramsay. The way you lent into crossing over into lifestyle and culture. Look, people who were genuinely in town because they were going to the football, right? Yeah. So they and I think they open up in a different kind of way when they're talking about football. Look, and there's the swearing and the banter and everything that comes with it. They're not on talking, like Gordon's not on talking about cooking generally. He's coming on talking about the football, and they show a different side of themselves when they lean into that. And I think those things then, the banter comes, the clips go out, and I think that's why they then resonate and get the traction that they do.
Yeah, look, I mean, the number one thing for me when I agreed for the show to go on Netflix was that I didn't want to lose the tone of voice. I think I've said to you before, Ed, that what I believe makes our shows and the rest of football in particular successful are that they don't sound like orthodox broadcasting. I mean this figuratively rather than literally, but the kind of besuited, tie-wearing formality of traditional TV is replaced by very much by a conversation that I think the public recognises as being much more like their own conversation. Yeah. Yes, it's Gary Lineker talking to Alan Shearer, Micah Richards and Joe Cole. So in other words, you've got an awful lot of England caps, World Cup experiences, dressing room experiences to lean back on. But nevertheless, they talk about football in the same passionate, unguarded, honest, authentic way that perhaps they would have without the cameras filming them. I always said to them from the very start, Ed, that all the best conversations I'd ever heard as a football producer were in the green room, that they were always better than the conversations that you heard in the studio. And I said very clearly to them, what I really want is the green room conversation. The bit where Alan Shearer admits that he's got no love for Sunderland and hopes they go down. The bit where Gary Lineker says, let me tell you about that manager I worked for. He was a complete piece of shit. That's the kind of conversation you only get in that unguarded way. And I think Netflix understood that, and they allowed us to bring that tone of voice to the shows, which made them seem very different from the orthodox broadcasting, very fine broadcasting on both ITV and BBC, but a different tone of voice.
Yeah, look, and I think there was a number of threads that I spotted as well. Obviously, you had Mayor Mamdani on as well, right? Which no one probably would have expected you, but ultimately, if you think about it, he's kind of an obvious, such as his declared love of Arsenal, to get him along. And look, and I don't know how hard that was to get him along to do something like that, but I guess then in his time to get him in, all he wants to talk, right, is about football and Arsenal and those kind of things. So he almost like it's an easy one for him to do compared to what his day-to-day is probably like and all the things he's answering.
Yeah, well, we went to him. We went to the town hall, and he was great fun, and he's a genuine Arsenal fan. Blimey, I mean, he was recounting games he had seen from the League Cup in the noughties and was naming players who I could only just pull back from memory from that time. Wow. So, a genuine football fan.
But that stuff resonates with audiences as well, right? Because they see it too, that this guy is not just saying it's like we've seen a number of British politicians down the years, like I said, they support teams, and the reality is it's a little bit like the joke when you hear sometimes like what's your favourite Beatles song? Well, that'll be the greatest hits or something like that. It's like the reality is we've had lots of that kind of stuff, and people football fans can see right through it. But when someone's so versed, so knowledgeable, it really ggets across to audiences. Like, and I saw all the threads as well, like the darts thing you did as well. And we chatted about that, didn't we? I said, I really like that because it's a little bit like, Top Gear and the mid-priced car. Yeah. Like, you need all these different threads to pull on to I guess to keep the pace.
Yeah.
But then when you see the people you see doing it as well at the same time, that it's not taking everything too seriously. Like I said, for Netflix, coming back to that, it's entertainment. And
Totally.
that's exactly what they want.
And we wanted to have a really wide range, right? So we wanted to be able to have very serious conversations about England team selection, performance, how Thomas Tuchel had made his decisions, whether they were right, whether they were wrong. You want to be able to have that really authoritative conversation. And at the same time, you want to be able to have a much more relaxed conversation in which, Micah and Alan share funny stories from their own careers, take the piss out of Gary for talking about his, golden boot yet again. You want to be able to have that range of conversation.
Yeah.
And I think one of the great things about the podcast format is that it's very forgiving. We had no hard and fast time. We didn't have to hit an out. We could talk for 35, 40 minutes. We could talk for an hour. It really did depend on whether or not
there is no
it.
timing on a schedule, right? You ultimately, because you can do it for as long as you want.
Absolutely, and that allows you to lean back in conversations and let them continue. I worked for both BBC and ITV in my football producing days, and I can still remember coming out of an ad break and being given, you've got 4.5 minutes to chat before the next ad break, and you've got a host and 3 guests, and he gets a minute, he gets 45 seconds, and it would be very structured. And now suddenly you're sat with 4 guys, and they can chat for as long as they like. And if they finish, we move on, and if they haven't, we carry on.
I think that is part of the challenge of let's call it traditional media that it is so time bound like that, and I think that's why, obviously, shows like your own have had the success it's had, but also like a lot of the YouTube creators that we see now, that they can just go live for 3 hours if they want to, say what they want about what they want, and go down whatever rabbit hole their audience wants them to go down, because people do want those opinions and are quite happy to roll with it and see where it goes. And sometimes, well, if the opinions are a little bit too extreme, the audience will pull them back as well and say, look, that's not for us. We don't want you to go down that path.
Yeah. We built our podcast business in trying to deliver to the audience what they want, and we ask them a lot, and they tell us, when on The Rest Is History, I've told you this before, but when on The Rest Is History, we did a survey and got 20,000 respondents giving us a really granular assessment, analysis of the show. The one thing that stood out more than anything else was that they didn't want guests. They just wanted Tom Holland and Dominic Sambrook. And so we stopped having guests, It turned out that they just loved that central relationship between the two hosts. They had a parasocial relationship with those hosts. They thought they were their friends, and they didn't want it getting interrupted by some random professor from Stanford University. So we listened to the audience, and we tried to deliver them what they want.
It's interesting. I want to come back to what you talked about earlier, which was your social media team, right? Who sounded like they really did have the bad end of the stick, having to work throughout the night back in the UK. And look, you said
in New York. We took them to New York.
They're in New York.
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay,
well, we just felt that they needed to be there because the whole colour of the whole event is there. Because outside the windows in Times Square, there's probably 3,000 Argentinians singing and dancing.
Oh, you could hear them.
Yeah, absolutely. You could hear them in the set. And I've always felt that you get your best content when you go to where the thing happens.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so they did 400 million, like I said, 400 million social views, and it's interesting how was thinking about how clipping's become, a real discovery tool for long form as well, and you've got short clips on TikTok and reels and shorts, and I remember us having conversations about this years ago, right? Like, does one thing cannibalize the other? And look, we covered that off last time. I don't need to necessarily go into that, but how is that dynamic of how clips are helping to drive for the long form changing how you think about your content when you create it?
Well, I think this is a fascinating question, and I'd be lying if I said I had the full answer to this. We don't fully know yet whether short form, 400 million views in 6 weeks, is a marketing tool or just a platform agnostic delivery of the content to audiences where they want it. Do we care where people watch and listen to the show? And ultimately, the answer sort of for us is no, we don't. If you want to watch 6 1-minute clips of The Rest Is Football on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or Twitter, that's absolutely fine. If you want to watch it in long form, 35, 40 minutes of it on Spotify video or on Netflix for the World Cup, that's fine too. If you want to listen on Apple or on Spotify, no problem. We have to solve the commercialization. So our argument internally here at Goalhanger is that we put the content out there. We try to reach as many people as possible. We hope that they engage with it for as long as possible, because that means we're doing something right. If we're making good content, they watch for longer. Our job at the end of that is to work out how we get paid to make that content. Because of course, I'm a producer. Most of the team here are producers. We're not really a money organization. You know, you have to make cash, because if you don't, the business doesn't function. It's important. But our primary focus is on building shows that are engaging to fans.
You're not driven by the cash, you're driven by making great content.
Well,
and the rest
you
follows.
have to be, right? So my view for a long time now has been, make the best content you can and deliver it to the largest possible audience you can. And if they enjoy it, the monetization follows. And people who are much cleverer than that and are part of the business than me will solve it. My view is, make the content, outrun the commercialization, hope the commercialization catches you up.
Yeah. And do you feel like I guess I already know the answer to this question now. Like, I was going to ask you, do you feel like you've had to change how the content's made? But it feels like ultimately you're making the content that you feel is the right content, like you say, and everything else follows.
Yeah, I mean, we face a referendum every day on our content. People don't have to come back for it, you know. The extreme version of that, Ed, is with the membership club. You pay, you know, £6, £7, £8 a month for extra content, for early access, for ad-free, for priority in getting tickets for live shows. Now, we've got 256,000 people who are members of Goalhanger podcasts. Every single month they can leave. It's their choice. Yeah. So I like that dynamic, because the pain of churn, of people leaving, is a constant reminder to us that we need to create something so engaging, so entertaining, at such good value that the vast majority, about 96% of people, do not churn. And you know, if we go over 4%, we get a bit troubled and we start looking at whether we're delivering the best content we can. If we're under 4%, we think we're doing a pretty good job.
No, that makes total sense. Like I said, in a lot of ways, it keeps you honest, right? It makes you focus
totally
on the things that matter, because
it's audience
the quickest
first.
thing. It's audience first. It's the quickest marker you've got to know if you're doing things right or doing things wrong.
Correct.
So they will vote with their feet.
We have a number of these markers. One of them is membership. How many people remain in the membership clubs? You know, fortunately, they are continuing to grow, which is a good sign. But also things like total audience reach is important to us. And also, we really like the metric of how long people watch for. You know, we like average view duration is a key indicator for us, because it's one of the things we can control. We can control the quality of the content. If the content's really good, people watch for longer. So that's a really good way for us to say, yes, we're doing our job properly.
Interestingly, so obviously the memberships are key, right? And obviously by having those members, you learn a lot. So would you say now that as a business that more and more as this membership number has grown, is a lot of your focus now going towards the data as well?
Oh, we've become data obsessed. I've become a data bore. We've actually hired somebody that's all they do. They literally just do data every day. We have the data delivered to us in all manner, in graphs, in tables, and we assess it, we look at it, and we learn from it, and we use it. We use it in a lot of our decision making. What we don't do is rely on it to the point where it makes the decisions for us. What we do is we use it to inform our decisions. So, you know, I still want to be choosing what content we do based on producer intuition, by you know, what we believe works. But let's be honest, you know, I'll give you an example. When we on the Rest is History membership club, we did a 4-part series with Mary Beard, the great historian of ancient Rome. It was exclusive for members. It did massive numbers. You will not be shocked to hear that we have booked Mary to come back again. You know, that's it's a perfectly sensible thing. Anthony Scaramucci, how did we end up with him as our American politics podcaster? And I'll tell you why. Because he came on the Rest is Politics UK, and it was the highest downloaded episode of the year. So I contacted Anthony and said, let's have lunch. I want to talk to you, and hired him on the spot. You know, the data can be extremely informative, but it shouldn't be the only thing you use.
Yeah, it's a thing. It's helping you to sort of like to pick out those things that ultimately you should identify and explore more. Interestingly, I was going to ask you about sort of around the data as well, because I remember the last time we spoke as well, you talked about, you were mindful around when you launched on YouTube around whether the audio pod would be cannibalized, and obviously now you've gone to Netflix. Have you got any sense of what's happened there, or is the same thing borne out as happened before with YouTube? Are you comfortable that it's had no impact, positive, negative?
It's a good question, and it's not fully answered yet. But what I would say is that part of the deal with Netflix was to take the show off YouTube for the duration of the World Cup. Yeah. Clearly, the consequence of that was our numbers on YouTube were much diminished on where they were 2 years ago in Berlin. It was only historical content and short form that was being watched. But I think overall, my estimation of this is that the YouTube audience went to Netflix. Additional people found the show because it was on Netflix. And the audio was, broadly speaking, left alone.
And because we often get told, right, that it's really, really difficult to move the audience around. So if that does bear out, it proves that, I think, and it comes on my next question, because I was going to ask about talent, that if the mix of content is right and the value exchange is good enough, the audience will go where they need to go. And I think that shows a bit of a power dynamic shift, because I think we've been used to the platforms having a certain level of control. So are we saying here that almost like talent becomes the new platform now?
I think talent are definitely fundamental in this question. I would like to give Netflix a bit of credit here as well, though, because their marketing campaign for this show was incredible.
Yes, yeah.
You know, every morning they took over 3,000 bus shelters in the UK. That's a remarkable commitment. You know, they did wraparounds in big buildings in London. They really came to the party with it. Did a brilliant marketing job. The socials definitely did a really good marketing job as well. But I think ultimately, if you wanted to see Gary, Alan and Micah this World Cup, you only had one place you could do that. Micah was also on screen for the BBC back in Salford. Alan was out of vision for the BBC as a co-commentator at, 10 or 12 games around the World Cup. Yeah. Gary was exclusive on Netflix for the whole tournament.
Thought it was clever how he popped up on ITV as well, just to sort of keep him in the conversation.
Yeah, that was his idea. He gets the full credit for that. He just said, "Why don't I pop along?" I'll tell you why, because he started off from the fact that he kept saying to me every day as he came into the New York studio, "Oh, I really like ITV studio. What a great location they've got. It looks brilliant." And then obviously he's really good mates with Righty. And he just said, "Do you know what? Why don't I just pop her down and say hello?" And I rang ITV and said, "Do you want Gary to come on air?" And they said, "Absolutely, we do." And so he popped up in prime time. It was great fun.
No, look, it was really, really interesting, and it was. And look, I know he's got obviously this new show coming out as well, so that tied in nicely for him as well. So it felt like it all had reason to happen. So look, moving to what's next. Obviously, you announced, in the last episode, that you are going to continue with Netflix the next 2 years. You mentioned it earlier. So I guess, what, obviously, clearly they're happy, right? What is that going to look like? Because Premier League, week to week, right, is different to World Cups. I'm assuming we're not going to be having daily shows. Is it going to be a similar cadence to what you do now as a pod show, or is there going to be something different and new?
No.
Do you have to build a studio now for this as well?
Definitely not. It looks different from the deal that you saw this summer. And this summer was a very high lift. We took the whole team and built out a very large team to New York City. We were there for by the time you built in, I factored in 2 weeks of build up. A lot of the team were out there for 50 plus days. It was a big old lift. And we built a studio in a completely empty space. I hired the guy that had set designed the Oscars last year. We went to town on it. We had a good budget, and believe me, Ed, we spent it. So, all the money was on the screen. The talent were, we looked after them brilliantly. Everyone had a fantastic time. It was very hard work. Gary Lineker did an amazing job every single day for 40 days. So we now return to the UK. We know that the interest in the Premier League season will start to ramp up fairly soon. not least as the kind of transfer window, becomes more and more interesting. And what we're going to do is we're going to put the show out on Netflix on a Monday and Friday, and it will be very timely. So, I mean, the key point here is that Netflix wants a show that people come back to each week. It's not a box set.
And it feels like it bookends the weekend.
Correct.
Yeah.
It reviews the weekend, and then it will review the midweek action, Champions League, etc., and it'll look forward to the weekend. And so, I think the really important thing for them was, much of the content on Netflix, you can watch 5 episodes back to back, and then you can disappear off and do something else. This won't allow for that because it's an ongoing week by week narrative. Yeah. If you want to keep up with the conversation around the Premier League, come back on a Monday and a Friday, and you'll get an updating narrative story.
It's interesting. I remember years ago, before you'd even done this round, we chatted about this when we were about, like, where would a show like this sit, and I think we'd homed in a little bit on a Friday, because there weren't that many things that were coming out on a Friday. And look, Monday you have Monday Night Football, and there's usually a game, but similarly you didn't have a lot of stuff around then. And then the world's changed over the last 4 or 5 years, right? But I think for them to lean into this now and have those days, like you said, that bookends the weekend, feel like the right kind of thing for them, just leading into the weekend and coming out of the weekend to re-summarise.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is pioneering. This is about something that isn't delivered by, a Hollywood studio or a big TV drama studio in London, perhaps. It's a ready-made show that's got its audience, that's got its 3 big talent, that's very comfortable in its own skin. And the idea for Netflix is to effectively license it onto their platform and hope that they can build audience over the next couple of years. And with an ideal end game, I guess, that the European Football Championships in the UK follow straight on.
Yeah. And look, it's interesting. Like, obviously, they did what they did with the World Cup, and now they've committed for 2 years of this. So, look, right, you don't have to go into detail. Do you think this opens the door to have further conversation with them about other resties titles? Are they looking at other verticals? And there'll be some that they like and some that they don't, I'm sure, for obvious reasons, I guess. Is there not necessarily is there a conversation going on, but is it something that they're looking at because of the success of this?
I think undoubtedly the podcast space is the one that Netflix is looking at most keenly for new content to license and to commission going forward. We've already seen in the US, many of your viewers will be familiar with The Ringer, which is a network of shows made largely in Los Angeles, which includes shows about basketball, NFL, movies. They are all now licensed by The Ringer onto Netflix. We haven't seen that take place in the UK yet, but conversations are ongoing with almost every provider in our space. I would very much expect to see video podcasts on Netflix increasingly as the year goes by. The other thing I would say about this is I would expect to see more and more sport adjacent content on Netflix. It works for them. The boxing's worked. The documentaries have worked. They've got the Women's World Cup in Brazil next summer exclusively in North America, Netflix, which is a very big deal indeed. I would expect this to be the opening of a door that becomes increasingly ajar.
What's interesting as well is, and I wanted just to pivot towards your Accelerator program, Mike. So obviously they've, in a sense, come to you to do something that they don't do themselves. And similarly, I know you're always looking for new content verticals, and obviously you've created a number of them, right? You've now launched the Accelerator program back in June, where you've got 6 creators. Why now? What's the strategic thinking behind investing in other creators rather than just scaling your own shows or creating your own shows?
Yeah, we just want to be able to talent scout. I mean, ultimately, it's we see the correlation between long form, traditional audio and now video content and short form as becoming increasingly close. We want to back a whole suite of younger influencers and creators, because we also want to be able to develop the next generation of people who could potentially host our shows. We're giving a reasonable amount in this deal. We're not, we haven't signed them on some kind of long-term exclusivity. We're hoping to offer them some. We're hoping to offer them some help. We're going to give them some money. We're going to give them some training. We're going to let them speak to people who are perhaps a little further down the path than they are at the moment about wise learnings. We're also going to offer them commercial support should that be a possibility. It's a bit like a Premier League football club having a really strong academy. You want to be able to see, is one of them going to burst out of that academy and through sheer performance and ability and talent and hunger and enthusiasm make a case to play on the first team? And I think there's every chance that we'll see that happen over the next few years.
I know you've always looked for up and coming talent in the business anyway. There's a number of people, right, that you have hired who've come almost straight out of university, and you've brought them into the business, and ultimately, a lot are still with you, right, and some have gone on to other things, and that's just life. But I think this feels like the next step in the way that you've invested in young talent coming through. And I think just obviously, look, the headline thing was like, they get a £10,000 investment, but how is that being spent by those creators? Is it through the things you described earlier? Is it time and...
Well, no. They get that to spend how they want. I mean, right, but ultimately, what I really want them to do is to upscale their kit. Is to make sure their cameras are absolutely as good as they can be. To their microphones, their recording equipment. I want them, if they've got a passionate desire to do a mini series on the cooking of Italy, to be able to go there. These are the kind of things we want them to be able to do, so that the content feels technically and editorially upscaled in a way that perhaps if they're having to make a decision out of their own earnings as to whether they do that, they might say, do you know what, I'll put it off for a bit. But we just said, look, here's a chunk of change that, do what you think will most enhance your product going forward.
Yeah. It definitely sounds like the way you're describing it, that you're absolutely not trying to force them into a Goalhanger template of doing things, but you want them to have the space and time to really build on what's made them a success. So you know what happens? Like often businesses will buy another business or invest in another business, and then everything they were famous for, they decide not to do it anymore, and then it was actually pointless doing that. In the end, it sounds like you're actually, no, build on the thing that we liked you for and go bigger with it.
Absolutely. We are not trying to turn them into, Micah Richards or Gary Lineker or Dominic Sambrook. That is not the idea. The idea is that they've already proven to us, because we had an extremely competitive process for selection, they've already proven to us that they have something special, something we believe in, something we believe can really afford them the ability to scale up, to become, influential and to show off their talent. So the last thing on earth you want to do is knock it out of them. You want quite the opposite. You want to say double down on what's got you so far. And frankly, we don't want a relatively small amount of money to be a blocker, and we want to make sure that you get to talk to people who can usefully help and guide you should you wish to get that guidance.
No, it is fascinating. I remember as soon as it was announced, I messaged you straight away going, this sounds really interesting and different, and for them to be able to get exposed. Like, I've been lucky enough to spend a lot of time, obviously, in and around your business and seeing how everyone functions, and not just yourself, right, but Dom, who we've recorded some other stuff with as well, and the wider team, and I know how people function, and I know that there's a great deal of leeway, and I guess you empower people to go do their jobs and learn, and so I get the sense that they'll get that too.
I certainly hope that they find it rewarding, that the culture that we hopefully have built at Goalhanger, which is, as you say, quite a young culture really. We've got 88 staff now, but I would say the vast majority are in their are 25 to 35. They're in that kind of perhaps first or second job out of school or college, and we've got a lot of creative, a lot of smart people here. And I like to think that because we've got a lot of them quite young, we've been able to imbue them with an ethos and a culture that means they believe in taking risks with content to create communities who really appreciate their content, and that they understand that we are a content first business. We are a business, we do make money, but that is a consequence of hopefully doing the primary thing properly.
No, look, it's fascinating. Look, Tony, thanks you so much for your time. I think I was going to say, For anyone who hasn't seen the original episode we did, like I said, back in December, we will put that in the show notes as well when we finish this episode. Look, you seem to be announcing something every other day at the moment. Is there anything else we've missed before we close out?
I don't think so. I think, the fact that we've got 2 more years on Netflix has been pretty much dominant. It was, by the way, it was a deal that I did during the World Cup. So can you imagine?
No, I can. Yeah,
it was pretty pacey. I mean, these deals normally take months and months and months. And I think we did the whole thing in a week.
No, it's great. No, I remember when we were texting on Monday and you sort of dropped that. Well, like, right, we need to record this quick, get this out. So no, look, I appreciate that. I appreciate getting your time this week.
Pleasure.
And other than that, I will see you in Amsterdam on Sunday for Ajax Burnley,
where we will go and see Burnley take on the mighty Ajax of Amsterdam.
Yeah,
and
not massively
almost
hopeful at the
certainly,
moment with the new manager and half a team.
Unsuccessfully, exactly.
Yeah. Look, thank you so much for your time. Like I said, anyone who hasn't seen the previous episode, it will be in the show notes. Look, right, everyone knows the Goalhanger portfolio. Rest is football, rest is history, rest is politics, rest is entertainment, rest is science. Like, the list goes on. So many successful podcasts that are definitely worth a listen. Great personalities, but also so informative. So I would absolutely recommend, and we can put a few of those links in there as well. Any questions, any feedback, if you want to feature as a guest, you can email us at hello@attentionshift.media, or you can message me on LinkedIn. But all I've got to say is, Tony, thank you so much for your time, and see you again soon.
It's been a pleasure, Ed. See you soon.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more videos just like this. And make sure you smash that bell icon too, so you're always the first to know exactly when a new episode drops.